kind of explore our favorite horror movies and compare the different genres and the different periods. My guest, Tim Ritter, who's a new horror filmmaker down here in South Florida, the grandfather of gore, Herschell Gordon Lewis. Tim, is it safe to say that Herschell is a man that you attempt to, when I say emulate, I mean that you kind of look up to his early works as being the classic?
Definitely inspired, has inspired my work along with, other directors like David Cronenberg and John Carpenter. But when the video rage hit in the 80s, all of his movies came out on video, which made it very accessible for me as a guy in high school grabbing a Super 8 camera and going out there and doing it. And the way he did it was the way I definitely sort of copied.
Kind of the model to strive for, Herschell. How does it feel to be the inspiration of young filmmakers?
Terrible. Well, I would hate to think that I'm the progenitor of all this stuff that's coming out, although obviously, since a lot of people think I died about 30 years ago, this posthumous attention is kind of pleasant.
You saw Tim's film. What was your reaction? Now, be candid. I mean, if you thought it stunk, if you thought it was horrible, if you thought it was...
We've got a lot of bad reviews on it.
You could tell him, right? You could just let him have it.
I don't work that way. I criticize in rather cosmic terms.
I knew that going in.
I would say about Killing Spree is not the movie I would have made. And I'll tell you why, Tim. 2 reasons. Number 1, you're about a half an hour in before the first gore effect occurs. And number 2, that effect in which the fellow has cut off this girl's head. The head is about as lifelike as a department store mannequin, and you've got it stuffed with glop, which is, I think, the proper way to do it, but it's obviously not anybody's head. The effect, Steve and Roger, he takes this girl upstairs, her fiance, who is rather much older guy, and there's a plot question I have, too, with Tim, which is, the night before, he had just arbitrarily thrown this older guy out of his house. Mm-hmm. The next day, the fella shows up again. Hi, how are you? As though nothing had ever happened. There's this missing piece in there.
Maybe that was just in your print.
It might be, yeah. Right.
No.
Anyway, this older guy brings his 18-year-old fiancée.
Mm-hmm.
And
I can relate to that.
All right.
Sounds good to me.
I wouldn't call him the anti-hero, who has a full beard plus a mustache, which is rather disconcerting, by the way. I had thought I'd get used to it after a few minutes, but it's red. Mm-hmm. And so
is that this guy in the front cover dripping blood?
I don't know who it is.
Asbestos felt, yeah.
Okay. But I couldn't, at first I felt the guy was a lunatic, and then the structure of the plot line made him out to be a totally rational person, and yet he is a lunatic, so the audience is misled from front to end.
Well, if they're as confused as I am listening to you describe it, I'm sure they would be.
I'm simplifying it.
Oh, okay, I see.
Herschell, don't you feel like a movie like this should start out, maybe even over the credits, with a killing
Absolutely.
Or something savage to
Absolutely.
set the tone and to keep the pace going right away?
Sure, in the Gore Girls, we start with a gore scene, and then have the credits.
Now, I want to stop you at this point. By the way, this is going to be a very constructive experience for you because you're going to incorporate. It may be humbling, but it'll incorporate. You can incorporate some of these suggestions in your future.
Oh, definitely.
But you want to know something that's interesting?
I just want to guarantee he's not going to slash the tires of my car.
Well, it's you go to Tire Hut. They'll give you 4 new tires. Not to worry.
Yeah, you're right, Tire Hut.
The point I want to make is even skilled, professional filmmakers with millions and millions of bucks budget make that very same mistake. But anyway, Tim, I was just saying that so you can understand that the most experienced filmmakers sometimes do these same kind of things. So go ahead. Go ahead with your positive cosmic review.
All right.
Go ahead.
Well, anyway, he has chopped the head off this girl, but he's done it off camera, which is exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
If you're going to chop somebody's head off, for God's sake, do it on camera.
Makes sense.
Absolutely, try it. It's really the only way to do it.
Or do it with shadows, something.
Well, there's some action. Yeah, he just shows up hoisting this thing.
Right.
And as he does, the suspense drops through the floor because it's quite obvious it's not somebody's head. Anyway, he then throws it down the stairway at this other older man, hits him in the head with it, and kills him.
Make that spare.
But he doesn't... Yeah, it's almost like a bowling scene. Now, I have no idea whether you're going to be killed by a stuffed department store mannequin head or not. I've always thought they were hollow, but that is, again, beside the point. He hits him in the head with it, but there's no gushing of blood from that. The guy just collapses quietly to the floor, and the next scene is a burial scene right out of the original Dracula, where he is carving a sandy, because we're in South Florida, grave, and burying these people in it. I think it's Inside Out. The burial scene is in itself not horrible. The horror that we might have had would have been, first of all, for this girl screaming, how did he cut her head off? And she never made a sound, unless he happened to catch her voice box in the first thrust.
OJ did it.
Yeah, you're right.
Hang in there, Tim, hang in there.
Based on a true story.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but see, being based on a true story is inconsequential. Aldous Huxley once said that he knew a story about a fellow who was driving through the Arizona desert. A jackrabbit jumped into the car, knocked his eye out with his back leg, and jumped out of the car. He said, that happened, but if I put it in a story, it would not be right because people would not believe it.
No one would believe it.
Yeah.
Get to the part of the killing spree that you enjoyed.
I just did. Well, the point is not that I enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it. You see, that's all subjective anyway. Just as Roger and I like a movie you didn't like.
Right.
There are enough people who will like one aspect, and it's one guy's meat is the other guy's poison.
Exactly.
I simply said that Killing Spree is not made the way I would have made it.
But Tim, you've seen all Herschell's films and hopefully were influenced by his techniques, but these are, how are you doing here?
Well, it's like a black comedy is probably the best way to label it. I mean, a lot of people don't get that tone. If you don't get that tone right away, like
That's right,
with
it's
the
lost
first
then.
scene, yeah. If you
I
don't
didn't
get that
sense it.
right away.
I couldn't figure out the old woman who came to borrow a bottle of aspirin or whatever it was she borrowed. I couldn't relate that to the plot line. She was standing in his driveway when he came up. There were pieces here that looked like pieces. And for satire to succeed, the audience has to be in on it from the word go. You can't come at them after it's over and say, P.S., this was a satire.
Well, and again, I've known you for years, Herschel, and one thing about Herschel is he is never, remember you said, I'm never unkind, I don't like to attack anybody else's work because I identify, and that's why I don't make a good critic, but you certainly have
decimated that.
Another good review.
But I would
to the
point out
scrapbook.
to you, Steve, to Roger, to Tim, and to anybody listening in, this was all you're doing. You're the instigator.
Well, yeah, but I figured you'd love it.
Oh, yeah. Of course. I salivated. I don't get that cat head off.
It is fun, though, Steve, being in a room with two filmmakers who've never had an outtake.
Not only never had an outtake, not having enough film.
What is this?
An outtake meaning a flub or something that they
He's
don't
talking
use in
about-
the
In
film.
other words, they just included
They just
in the film.
included
No
One to
edits.
one shooting ratio.
Is that
yeah.
true? Is that true?
Now, Killing Spree is like 3 to 1.
3 to 1.
3 to 1.
Yeah. 3 takes, we used 1. Was that too much?
Very impressive.
But then I did an interview with Lena Wertmuller a couple of weeks ago, and her ratio for Swept Away was 50 to 1.
Wow. Some takes in Killing Spree was just one. That was it. That may explain some of the
She shot and
continuity
shot and shot and
problems.
then boiled the whole thing down to just nothing.
Well, film is so expensive that you have to really,
You screened this at the Cannes Film Festival?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we had to distributor films around the world. New York took it to, all the
What
festivals around the world.
courage.
But within the first 10 minutes, all our buyers walked out. So that's got to be right in line with
No,
what
this was,
Herschel
what I
did.
like
this was
about
a
you,
canned
Tim.
film festival.
Yeah.
Tim is a wonderful guy because his ego is not on the line. And I admire that. I'm serious. I really do admire that.
You think he's got a future in film?
Positively. I think the only thing he has to do is to say to himself, if I were watching this thing instead of making it, would this scene have any effect on me other than one of ridicule?